What's up, fellow gamers? Phreak here, and here at Riot Games, we're working on patch 13.11, the follow-up to the mid-season patch. A couple unfortunate things is that the patch was delayed 24 hours in being the probably biggest patch of the calendar year. It's the one that required the most follow-up, and we had one fewer day than normal to react to it, which kind of sucks, but it is what it is. We're making the best of it. We had our first big planning meeting for the patch earlier today. I'm recording this on Monday night. Our patch is more or less locked on Wednesday, so we don't have a ton of iteration time with a lot of data, but of course throughout the season, we'll keep things updated, we'll keep going with it and do what we can. My understanding, for some pro context, is I believe week 1 of the LCS will be on 13.10, they'll move to 13.11 in week 2. I think that is accurate, I'm not 100% sure, but I believe that's going to be the case here. So just in terms of context for what kind of patch people are going to be playing on and what's going on there. Ultimately, this is what's going to happen when we're shipping any kind of a mid-season, and there is only so much time in the calendar year. Theoretically, this could have shipped in 1309, I guess, and then people playing games at home are playing on a very different version from most of MSI, as opposed to just being kind of overlapping near the finals. To me, that version actually makes sense, where the patch comes out near the end of the tournament. Similar things seem to happen with preseason and Worlds. I think that makes a lot of sense. Obviously, post-Worlds, there's a pretty long break before the pro season starts back up, as well as the rank reset and everything else like that. But for mid-season, if we're going to do something like this, I think this timing makes sense. That is my opinion as a dev and as a player. As a player, I like when things shake up. Yes, there are some things that are overpowered and underpowered. I take that personally when I'm a player to be like, oh, I'm going to go find the new thing and, yes, abuse that, right? I'm going to try to solve the game faster than other people do. And that is something that there's not a lot of space to do in. And so I kind of like that, right? Riot balances the game pretty aggressively. There's not a lot of really extreme outliers in any situation for most of the year. I actually believe that, by the way. This is not me shilling. Like, there's a lot of other games with substantially more variant balance out there, and games that I play and enjoy very much. But I think Riot, balances League really well, and I believe that before I joined SRT, and I still believe it here on the team that's responsible for this kind of stuff. Either way, we posted a patch preview on Twitter with overall targets this afternoon. I am here to talk about the things that I am personally implementing and have been working on that are going into this patch. And I want to do a quick caveat that there is no guarantee that the individual changes currently in this document are going to be what's going live. There is still time for iteration, there is time for feedback, and there's time for players better than me to be like, actually, this is going to be too much, it's going to be overpowered, it's going to be underpowered, please move in this direction. So we'll reiterate that every time we get to each of these bullets, but overall, I want to make sure it's very clear that these are not locked in stone as changes, and there is still time to move things around. But this is my best guess on where they should go, and so we'll see what happens, because again, this is kind of the first day of doing this work in earnest and implementing it into the game. I believe all these changes will be on PBE on Tuesday morning, so you can play with them yourself and see how they feel. Let's get into it, and it wouldn't be one of these videos without our good old friend Azir here. So I had spent a lot of time over the last couple of months looking over what players have been doing with Azir, how he's been performing and whatnot. Seriously, I spent arguably more time than I should, but I was really, really curious to dig into what was going on. So first, we're going to see a bunch of data of Azir's play rate basically in the summer split of last year up through Worlds. And so this is what patch this is from solo queue. The play rate of him in solo queue, the win rate of the champion across those games in solo queue, and the corresponding pro presence on that patch. Now, I want to point out that for basically every single person, they're about a week and a half ahead of pro play. So if you use LCS as an example, from last year, the patch would go live on Wednesday morning. So if you're going to play games Wednesday at noon, congratulations, you are playing on the first day of the patch. And in 14 days, you're going to play on a new patch. In 10 days, LCS would play on that patch, because that would be Thursday, Friday, Saturday, add 7 is 10 days. 10 days later of the 14-day patch, the LCS starts playing on it. They start playing it, I think it was noon on Saturdays, and it'd be about 5 hours of games, and then Sunday they'd play 5 more games. You would get the first half of that patch's pro presence. You could play on Monday and Tuesday, and that was your experience playing that patch. So basically, anytime you see pro presence here, it mostly informs the next patch. That's just how that's going to work, right? For things like LCK, sometimes I don't remember what it was like for them last year, but there are times where like their week start was on like the Monday or Tuesday, and so the 1 week waiting period was patch goes live on Wednesday, or I think, yeah, it's Wednesday local time every time, I'm pretty sure. 1 week goes by, and then it's like, well, okay, it's we're ready to move to the next patch, but we have to wait until the next Monday for the patch to start, and the Korean overlap was like 2 days. And sometimes the overlap would be 7 days, but sometimes the overlap would be 2 days, right? So this is all just to say, hey, by the way, this is the global solo queue across all ranks win rate of the champion, right? So one more thing I want to point out here, by the way, with this metric, with this data, is higher skilled players play more games than lower skilled players. So even though there are more players between Iron and Gold than Platinum and Challenger, there are, in some cases, I don't remember exactly, there are more Azir games in Platinum to Challenger than in Iron to Gold, because the presence of a elo skewed champion who is in pro play tends to skew toward elite MMR. Unsurprisingly, but hey, by the way, that's one of the inherent biases when you measure like blank flat win rate and blank flat play rate, is you are disproportionately measuring players in higher elos. Just keep that in mind as we talk about this data. So what I want to point out is a phenomenon that many players have pointed out, and that there is nuance to, and so I want to dive through that, and another nuance that I want to bring up as well. So I want you to notice the climb in play rate week over week until he finally got nerfed. He went from a 2.5% pick rate to a 3.5% pick rate with no direct changes to Azir. This corresponded with a 1% win rate loss to Azir that kept cascading patch over patch. And wouldn't you believe it, every single time it went up, it's because he was in pro. He was in pro, and the presence kept going up, and then finally he receives a nerf in this patch. He wasn't, well, this, to be fair, is overlapping with playoffs, right? 12.15 postseason. Teams are playing their playoffs overall, and so you're playing 12.17 while teams are still playing their postseason, 85% presence, but it corresponds with a nerf to Azir. 12.18, by the way, is the Worlds patch. So this is why it's 72% for all these patches in a row, because this is the Worlds patch and whatnot going on here. So you'll notice that the pick rate keeps climbing as he's in pro. Azir is one of many champions, if Felix is in here as well, where the champion is somewhat popular on their own. They're not often absurdly popular, but a lot of their popularity comes from players mimicking pro play, saying, well, Faker's playing it, Bjergsen's playing it, maybe not last split, but or last year, whatever, but hey, Zeka's playing it. Okay, maybe not during the regular season, let's be clear. No one cared about him then. But, hey, these really good players like Chovy and Faker and Knight are playing it. Maybe I should play it too. And so this champion, without getting any direct changes, gets more and more popular. And because people who don't normally play the champion are getting on to a high skill champion, though the win rate starts to decay. So there is a nugget of truth to this Reddit Twitter opinion of play rate and win rate are inversely related. But I want to point out, right, one, Azir is an incredibly difficult to play champion with a very high mastery curve who is unlike other champions, right? This is true. I think we all agree with this one. And two, going from here to here is a 40% play rate increase, right? So 40% more plays on a hard to play champion is a 1% win rate loss. And this is if we can assume this is like, perfectly, accurately, this is the only iteration, the only thing going on here, and it wasn't that some other mid laners might have gotten buffed or something else went on that messed with Azir. I didn't look that deeply on win rate trends, but I think this is, relatively strong enough. And I want to point out, by the way, that the sample here is around 400,000 Azir games per patch. So our 95% confidence interval on what should the win rate really be if we replayed all the games in the patch over again is I think it's 0.2%. It's very, very low. So, maybe this is within variance, but this is not within variance of this. There is absolutely something happened. And again, it might not be the 40% play rate increase. It probably is. Again, I'm not trying to dive into that deeply to it, but there's at least a strong indication that getting a 40% play rate increase of a hard to play high skill champion can correspond with about a 1% win rate loss, right? So next time you want to try to do this as well, we're like, well, look, Olaf gained some play rate, or Cassante gained some play rate, or Aphelios gained some play rate, or Jinx, or Caitlyn, or Varus, or whatever. It's like, well, think about how popular were they already, And if you consider the baseline win rate and play rate was champs who knew the champion, air quotes, and the new play rate is a bunch of people coming in who maybe don't know the champion, okay, right, you can start comparing those two things together. But I just wanted to kind of dig into this play rate stuff because I think it's very interesting. So the nerf comes in and he drops to 45.2% win rate. And because there's no pro play in 12.17, the play rate, right, goes nowhere in 12.18. And then World starts. And the play rate goes back to historic highs. And then it kind of wavers around for a little bit. And then it goes to new historic highs as we get towards the end of Worlds and we start watching actually Faker and Chovy and not, play-ins teams, right, playing Azir. And it's like, oh, no, this champ is, right, 72% present pro, which, by the way, right, and we can look at this, right, this nerf was about a 2% win rate loss, or if you compare it to when the play rate was back to 2.5%, maybe it's more like maybe it's a 3% win rate loss, right, 2.5 to 3% win rate of a nerf. And we go to Worlds, and he's got the same, like this version of Azir, right, which lost 2.5% win rate, is higher presence than the 12.13 Azir, which was objectively stronger. Now, there may have been other mid laners that pros would rather have played in 12.13 or maybe even 12.14, but like an objectively nerfed Azir, right, climbing up, nerf of 2.5% win rate, back where he was. Back where he was a patch ago, right? This is why it's pretty much impossible to know how to balance for pro play. So I did a much smaller nerf than this for Caitlyn heading into MSI. So Caitlyn, I nerfed her in, let's say 13.5. I don't remember exactly when. But at the time, she was 100% pick ban of the LCK. LCK, of course, the reigning number 1, 2, 3, and 4, basically, teams in the world at that time, essentially. I mean, when your 4th seed wins the World Championship, you have the 4 best teams in the world is pretty much how that works. So 100% presence in the best region in the world. Reigning champions of the World Championship. Pretty much all the semifinal teams are yours, basically. Clearly the best. 100% presence. And I nerfed Caitlyn by like 1% win rate. And she goes from 100% presence in Korea to 75% presence in Korea. And she retains the 75% presence throughout the playoffs of the LCK. And it's like, okay, I tried to nerf Caitlyn. And the LCS dropped her to like 50% presence. The LEC dropped her entirely. The LPL dropped her entirely. LCK still going strong. Up through the playoffs. Up through the finals. They're all about that Caitlyn pick. We go to MSI. 0 Caitlyn. So Caitlyn was here, got less of a nerf, and didn't go here. Right? Like, this is why it is actually impossible to balance for pro play. It is actually, like, you are throwing darts at a board after spinning around 360 degrees and blindfolding yourself. Like, it's hard to do this stuff, okay? Because you can ask, like, hey, Chovy, why does your team play Caitlyn? He's not going to tell me that. Right? Like, so, hey, you are throwing darts at a board a little bit here. There's not a really good way around it. Again, they kept it over in the LCK. They kept playing Caitlyn post the changes. Around the world here at the World Championship, they kept playing Azir post the changes. But you notice that the play rate, of course, remained quite high because he was still in pro play. And once again, we had this play rate climbs because he's in pro facet for Azir. And then preseason patch hits in 12.22. Azir's play rate drops back down to literally historic lows. Right? It goes from historic highs to historic lows a week later when a preseason patch hits. People are like, you know what? We're not competitive anymore. I'm not playing to win. I'm playing to try shit out. I'm out. I'm instantly dropping the Azir play. Obviously, the win rate goes up 1.7% because people are, right, back to this spot where they're not playing him because he's popular in pro. They're playing him for a different reason. People are essentially better at the champion. And, of course, again, there could be huge meta shakeups that make Azir better, right? If it's a more chaotic game, it might mean that late game scaling is stronger. All kinds of good reasons could be here why that's happening. Anyway, let's talk what happened with Azir in 2023. So we come into the year and, this looks familiar. We haven't had pro play since November. So with no changes to the champion, at all, it's even the same win rate, right? Right? It's back where he started. His play rate has decayed to literal historic lows because he hasn't been in pro for the last 3 months. 13.01. But then people are like, wait a second. Azir's in pro. And his play rate goes back up. And it's ready to start climbing again, right? This is a 20% play rate increase, basically month over month, because Azir's back in pro play. With no changes, here was Worlds, now we're back, and here we are again, right? We're back to the Azir play rate climb. So 13.04 had, so there's some really weird stuff here I want to talk about, okay? So 13.04, 13.03 is when Aurelion Sol and Annie came out. The Aurelion Sol rework and the Annie rework came out. I guess mid-scope, really, in the Annie version. Either way, hey, we've got these updates going on here. What's going on? Well, really, really strong champions who were really, really popular in the mid lane depressed everyone's win rates by about 1%. And I didn't realize this well enough at the time. I only realized it after the fact, and I wish I'd thought of it, but I didn't. I didn't realize that every single mid laner roughly lost 1% win rate on this patch, and gained it back the next patch when Aurelion Sol and Annie both got nerfed. I'm not 100% sure that Annie got nerfed. She might have just gotten less popular, but basically every single champion gained almost 1% win rate from this patch to this one. I went back and checked, and this was like relatively accurate. And this was Aurelion Sol and Annie literally depressing everyone else's win rates in mid lane, and then the nerfs making that less obvious. But hey, he was in pro play. These changes kind of looked like they might be nerfs. I think they ended up actually being relatively power neutral. This was like the base mana change. Like this was like base mana growth, and like maybe one of the like really minor stat changes. This was E and R damage and AP ratios. And this actually did have really good gains. This ended up being low elo skewed. So not only did it gain 1% win rate sort of generically because of like Aurelion Sol and Annie being offloaded, but also his win rate by MMR skewed back a little bit up towards low elo, which again, anything that brings down elite and brings up average is going to actually drop this metric, because this play rate is skewed towards elite MMR, right? Anyway, he wasn't in pro very much, right? His pro presence dropped, so his play rate dropped. This patch came out, it nerfed the shit out of him. His play rate, or his win rate went, down to the absolute gutter, right? Incredibly weak right here. I mean, it's back to where he was, during the last patch of Worlds, basically. It's 43% when he was popular, but, we don't have the bad Azir players holding down the win rate, so, he fell down really far here. It didn't move a whole lot. I mean, people got better at him overall, but people kind of started fleeing the champion. He's not in pro, he's not very strong. Big buff comes in, gives him, a solid 2.5-3% win rate. Play rate climbs a little bit, but he's not in pro, and so every single time we see he's not in pro, right, the play rate just decays if he's not in pro, even without changes, even with changes, right, it decays, right, it decays when he's not in pro. 3.6, right, 3.6 became 1.8% with no changes to Azir, right, it went half popularity from not being in pro is about what happened here as well, where he's 2% and he's trending towards 1%. Losing half popularity because he's not in pro is like what happens to Azir. This is just like how this champion seems to function. And he goes back into pro and he starts climbing back up. So a lot of this ebb and flow of pick rate is literally that, which is annoying. It's kind of frustrating, but there are seemingly a lot of pro following Azir players, or players that would be Azir players, but if he's not in pro, then I think he's good enough. There could be a lot of reasons why. I'm not going to ascribe a ton of meaning to it, but this was like an interesting deep dive for me around play rate stuff, and so I wanted to look into it. Anyway, he gets buffed right here. Again, play rate decays because he's not in pro. And this is where we are right now in early data of 13.10. I want to point out mid laners once again gained around, in Azir's case, he gained basically 0.8% win rate because mages got buffed in 13.10. Mages are stronger. Malvan is weaker. Force of Nature is weaker. Marksmen are a little bit weaker as well. Their items are on whole, their builds on whole are weaker than they were before. Yasuo and Yone as popular champions, Katarina as a popular champion. People are finding out their builds. Yasuo and Yone specifically were quite weak without Mythic Shield Bow, and they're very popular champions. Katarina, people figuring out the builds, and so they're building wrong. She's a popular champion. They're going to, deflate some win rate out of the ecosystem. So every single mage, basically, who just got better last chapter, better death cap, things like that, gained some win rate. And so Azir gained about 0.8% on the patch based on which MMRs you graph and whatnot. But that's kind of about the gain here. So it's like, okay, well, we do have some room to buff Azir. Obviously, again, his player is getting really low. And yeah, I would like to get back to 50% pro presence Azir. This is kind of the problem, is that Azir will just not be popular in solo queue, it seems, if he's not in pro play. It will just naturally decay on its own, and it means that we have to revolving door Azir's balance. That is what I believe to be true, that Azir's win rate has to be revolving door balance for pro play to just keep him at 50% presence, and if it ever goes 50 to 72, get ready for a 3% win rate nerf that isn't enough. So anyway, I'm looking to do Azir buffs, and so here are the changes to Azir. They're not numerous because, again, Azir gained a lot of win rate, and I'm pretty sure we are bound by elite. He is 47.6 globally, but this is over 49% in elite solo queue, and it's around 48% in high elo solo queue, which is plat plus. So there's not a lot of room without us being pretty confident he's going to be 100% pick ban in pro play. So I would like to give him 2.5% win rate so that this is a global 50% average. And if he's chilling at 50% average and he's still not in pro, it means we can buff him again, right? That would be nice to get to a point in Azir where you can just enjoy playing him and you don't have to rely on pro signals to get there. But anyway, they are buffs that are, the goal is not so much to continue to try to push that elo skew as much as possible. This is to try to give as much feels good. It's not quality of life because they're strictly buffs, but as much feels good changes to Azir players themselves. So a simple 2-second cooldown on early Conquering Sands. Keep in mind this is the ability that you max second, so it is going to be sitting at rank 1 from levels 1 through 7, well really levels 2 through 7. But this means for, the entirety of basically your first base, you've got a pretty substantial 14.3% off the Q cooldown. This should be reasonably well felt, and this should be relatively effective and do quite a bit. And even up till level 13, which is a large portion of the game, you're going to have a lower cooldown Conquering Sands overall, so more casts overall, more positioning overall, and this is helping Azir be able to play some more of his range matchups, because he's really, really skewed in melee versus range matchups, and I think a lot of Azir players aren't having fun being so destroyed in range matchups, so I'm trying to soften that a little bit. We're going to skip over the damage one and go to the summon range here. This is 525 on the W summon range. This does mean that his W auto has closer to 900 range now. It's about 300 center to edge, I believe, for the auto attack stab. So this gives him a pretty solid amount of auto attack range. So that, W auto certainly is stronger, but this is one of the things that I saw Azir players wish they could have back was some level of that old soldier summon range back. And now that he's not spamming Q for getting into range all the time, he's getting a little bit more often, sure, but the mana cost is going to be a little bit prohibitive. Just walking back a little bit of the summon range that you can maybe W auto in a few more spaces. Again, it's not a ton of power, but it's something there that should be felt at least a little bit. And unfortunately, this has to be a relatively conservative changes because he only has about 1% win rate room in really high MMR, which sucks. Again, if he has more room, I would give him more buffs, but this is me being a little bit conservative. And then just bringing back the old AP ratio 60% back onto Azir W. His builds, even if you look at only Masters Plus or only Challenger, he's not doing a lot of this weird Frozen Heart Rush I've seen people talk about. Yeah, there's not a huge need. He doesn't super ultra need AP ratios to make sure he's not building tank builds, but honestly, as much as Bruisery Azir could make some degree of sense based on how the E and R are as abilities, some more AP ratio, give it back, let him feel good about scaling with gold. I think is a pretty reasonable place to give him power, and this seems, overall pretty solid. So, this might end up being a lot of power. We'll see what happens, but again, there's a chance it gets walked back. There's a chance it's too much power. We will see. But this is the Azir changes, and the hope is that he's more fun to play. And there's a chance he gets in pro play as a result. I think 3 lines of buffs is enough for pros to look and be like, hey, what if he's good now? I know he's had a somewhat of an okay play rate in Elite throughout this whole time. He is around. I've had it even in my solo queue games at High Diamond. So we'll see. Those are the Azir changes. So next is a thing on Kalista. She was on PvE earlier. It's a big suite of changes. There's a lot of lines here. So I'm going to get them off your, whatever. Everything's on your screen right now. The big TLDR is these 2 lines of changes. Basically, basic attacks no longer miss if your target leaves vision, and damage dealt on hit is back to 100% total AD. So this change initially came in, so this was initially here as the designed counterplay measure to Kalista. So the way that normal champions work is if they are winding up their auto attack and you leave vision, generally speaking, the auto attack cancels. That is usually what happens with most champions. If they are not done autoing, they will stop. Now, some things are functionally spells, and spells can't get canceled without dying, or your target dying. Obviously, if a projectile's in the air, the projectile's going to go ahead and do the thing. But Kalista, because she has a very long attack windup, basically, if I recall correctly, it was she's going to be this wind up, and if you drop fog, I don't know if it was actually because of the whole attacks switch or attacks don't complete, but because she can't cancel her attacks, it might have been part of that interaction. Since you can't cancel her attacks anyway, because she's always going to hop. She needs to at least throw the projectile out somewhere. The other side of it was it's counterplay. It's high elo counterplay where if Kalista has a trade on you, you duck into fog and she misses the auto attack, then you come back out and fight her. That might have been part of it. Either way, I think at this point in time, it just feels like such a penalty. I think it is okay to have downsides on a kit if it is very clearly compensated within the same text. So I think of things like, hey, Senna and Thresh don't gain attack damage or armor by leveling up, respectively. But they pick up souls that give them that stat back. Is totally reasonable and gives you a minigame to play for, and the minigames feel good. I really enjoy playing both Senna and Thresh, and that's part of the reason. Vayne and Kaisa have very, very low base attack damage, but get functionally free on hit damage through their kits with Kaisa passive and Vayne W. Now, Vayne's in the weird spot where if you don't finish Noon Quiver, her last hitting on her turret really sucks, and that feels pretty bad as an occasional Vayne player. But like, okay, I can buy that one as well. Senna and Jin have below average crit damage. So do Yasuo and Yone have below average crit damage. This makes sense based on the other things that happen where, Jin gets automatic crits which deal percent missing health damage on them. And Senna gets a bunch of basically bonus AD on her auto attacks in the first place. That does percent health damage as well if you can land a second one. And Yasuo and Yone double their crit chance. It totally makes sense. So that can totally exist. I don't really believe that this really ever holds weight as, you're getting something in the end, you dash sometimes. Like, yeah, that's there, but it just kind of feels bad. This was brought up as something maybe a month or so ago. Like, this change has been internally for a little while. And then this was the similar one. This was actually a live balance change. This was back when Bloodthirster Rush was a big thing for AD carry. And basically, Kalista would get BF Sword on first back and just run the lane with how many aggressively strong AD ratios she had. There's like, we're just going to lower the number of AD ratios you have by a little bit. And that way you don't spike quite as hard on Bloodthirster. But again, this is just like, it's kind of mathed away by Rend. But like, the better version of this, honestly, is like, Ren doesn't have a punitive cooldown or a punitive mana cost. Her base AD is just low. And like, yeah, part of your kit is that you rend people as opposed to like, here's text that tells you your attacks is worse than other people's attacks. And so this was two good suggestions. Like, these are not my initial ideas to get rid of. But as I wanted to spin up a project of like, hey, I would I've been trying to buff Kalista like the entire year. She's not been in pro play, and for decent reason, have gotten pushback frequently that, hey, maybe we shouldn't buff Kalista. We're just shipping a bunch of AD carry item changes, which is what was in 13.1b. And then, hey, we're just shifting a whole bunch of support changes in 13.3. This could shake up the meta as well. Hey, we're doing a bunch of AD carry nerfs in 13.6 that are going to nerf a bunch of things that Kalista doesn't use, like Navori Quickblades and like other runes that she doesn't often go for or whatnot. It's like, okay, yeah, there's logic there. We can kind of wait on this one. Of course, she was a shield bow user, but Bloodthirst was nerfed, but not shield bow. So she wasn't a big BT user. So there were logical reasons to be like, we don't have to go for Kalista just yet. But when I finally had my time to be like, okay, look, she's still not getting played in pro. We're still not doing anything else here. Yeah, we're gonna do an AD carry meta shakeup with the mid-season stuff. But like, no, I really want to do this. I put it on my sprint planning, and I'm like, we're gonna go for some Kalista changes. And the initial pitch was like, okay, I'm gonna do a bunch of buffs. They're gonna try to get her some of that elo skew back because she's like a 45% win rate low elo champion who's been bound by pro play. Like, I'd love to find a way to do stuff to like soften this blow. Got some suggestions around fixing the passive. Like, that's a really good idea. Let's do that as well. These seem like really positive things. Actually, I'm really, really keen on this. I'll talk about it a little bit more later. Basically, okay, we're gonna start with these two lines of text. And the initial pitch was going to do these two lines and then a bunch of numbers changes for parity. And so her base attack damage goes from 66 to 61. For the keen-eyed members out there, this would have to actually have been 58 or 59 to have parity here. And that's not even counting runes and a Doran's Blade, which exists. So her actual level 1 attack damage is definitively higher than before. That's just true. It is that is what's happening, right? So, okay, fine, that's going on. We nerf for attack damage growth. Of course, her attack damage growth gets nerfed by more than 10%, right? 3.75 minus 0.5, that's more than 10% drop. Of course, she is buying actual attack damage in a lot of cases. And yeah, she does have more total base attack damage early on. As she buys items, those items are better, but those items are better compensated with her attack damage growth being lower, means that her functional base AD is basically within 1 to 2%. That's basically the math here. That's kind of what happens here. And so her total outgoing auto attack damage is really, really close overall. But then, of course, because her underlying attack damage is going down and her Q and her E are total attack damage ratios, she's just losing 5 to like 5 times 1.7 is like 8-ish. So she's losing like 5 to 13 attack damage, which means she's losing 5 to 13 damage on Pierce. But if we give her a 5% increased AD ratio here, it comes really close, accounting for actually buying items as well, because she's going to start with a Doran's Blade or a Longsword and a Stat Shard, and she's going to go buy, I did this math before the itemization ship. So this was, live shield bow, live rage blade, live hurricane, all that stuff. So the ecosystem's a little bit different here, so I'd have to rerun the math to get fine tuning on the numbers, but like there's a lot of room to work with here. Kalista's like a 45% win rate, so there's a lot of space. Like if we're aiming at 3 and we go high and we hit 4, she's still sub 50 for most players. Like I don't mind if there's kind of some room to mill about here. It's okay to be an exact least for now, and we can always fine tune whatever if needed. Obviously the goal is fine tune, but again, we're just barely getting data on this champion. She's not terribly popular, so even her builds, people are doing her builds a little bit wrong. And anyway, so a lot of math stuff is basically what's going on for the rest of this, right? So Pierce is really, really close. It's within 1% of basically all points in time on her builds from 13.9, 13.8. I want to point out, by the way, Rend 1 is getting no changes. So Rend 1 simply loses flat damage. 1 stack Rend is objectively nerfed, and there's no way about this, right? That is just always true. And I believe the case is that with and to be fair, I can actually test locally to test it for sure, but looking through her scripts, and I believe Runan's Hurricane doesn't care about this because Kalista's martial poise damage, the scripts are in her character script where she defines that she does 90% of damage. She defines a variable on her character, and then in her auto attack scripts, and there's like 3 or 4 of them, if she's crits, if she's slowed, if there's like a couple different conditions or like a different script runs which she auto attacks. And those auto attack scripts, right, on attack, and then when it hits, but it's like when Kalista attacks, then when it deals the hit, do this damage, run this script. Right, you comment out, we don't need to do the variable. The variable's back to 1.0 in case I missed something. But Hurricane, I don't believe, interacts with these scripts. So I believe Hurricane Kalista isn't affected by this buff, which means Hurricane Kalista is strictly nerfed via this change, right? Which means, of course, Hurricane itself got buffed in 13.10. We'll talk about that a little bit later. There's 80 carry changes in this patch as well for the itemization stuff. But it means that, hey, by the way, if you're landing like a Hurricane bolt into a Rend, it's just strictly weaker, right? We just lose some attack damage, and these numbers were in, assuming that, hey, this might be the case here, right? And so there's a weird guesswork in terms of how much of what things are happening, right? So let's say I'm autoing you and pulling out Rend right away. I ran the math on that, and so her functional base AD being higher and dealing more damage, especially as she buys items, because she's getting 11% more out of every bit of AD she builds. Well, Rend 1 is damage down, but the auto is damage up, and this means that 1 attack Rend is within 1% damage at all points in time. Cool, did the math. Okay, great. But that means the Hurricane bolts are going to be weaker. Okay, keep that back in your mind. Sure. 3 auto once Hurricane bolts Rend those guys, that part's weaker. Okay, that's an edge case that we can move on. Rend 2, okay, we run the math again. We bring up the total AD ratio because functionally she has less damage coming in, so we can kind of make good on the math here. This is basically just all a math problem because she functionally lost more in AD growth than she lost in base damage, right? This is compensated initially, instantly by this. This is not compensated by this, right? So her AD growth went down, and 3.25 is still on slightly it's like just north of like mean AD carry attack damage growth. 61 is also north of the mean. It's basically everyone's at 60 plus or minus 1 unless you're like exactly Kaisa basically. But it's like, okay, well, look, the math all works out that as you get a Doran's Blade and as you build your shield bow and all these items, the math is really, really close to where like any individual auto attack with E1 is the same damage, any individual auto attack with E2 is also the same damage. And of course, the math says that a lot of this has to be carried by this stuff, by the basic attack itself dealing more damage because it's strictly stronger all points in time. So the Rend is strictly weaker, accounting for her common item builds. Again, have not yet run the math with new Rage Blade and stuff, but that's the direction we're going, right? And minus 2 to 10 damage, again, the math lines up to be pretty accurate here. So the question is, how many stacks are you getting through Rage Blade? How many stacks are you getting through Hurricane? And how many times do you not actually rending your target? And I don't know the relative ratios of those, but the more of your bolts were from Hurricane, the worse his changeless looks. The more of your bolts were from Rage Blade, the worse his changeless looks. But the more of your bolts weren't rended because it was on cooldown, or you died, or you missed the rend reset, so it wasn't up for the second kill. I have to kind of guess on that, and I just said, you know what? They're all equal. If we just hit parity for I'm auto-attacking you with a Blade of the Ruin King, it's just the same character. And that was just kind of the choice I made, is like, screw it, that's the numbers. We'll let it pan out on its own, and we can move on. And if we did that change on its own in a random normal patch, we would have gotten a pretty good read on which direction we went, because I'd spent a lot of time doing all the math, and it's like, yep, this should be parity. And we play tested it, seems fine. Right, played the champion. We've put on a few playtests. I had one. I went 15-0 this morning in playtest on Kalista with these changes, but to be fair, we got a double kill at level 2 and never let up. It was a snowbally champion. Welcome to Kalista. Anyway, so then we said, okay, well, look, Kalista got freaking destroyed in the patch because she was one of a few champions who rushed for Mythic Shield Bow. And of course, Mythic Shield Bow got nerfed when it became a legendary. Nothing got buffed to the degree that Mythic Shield Bow, Mythic Kraken Slayer got nerfed. So if you were a champion that didn't have a reasonable replacement, nothing could have remotely come close to the power level that Kraken Slayer and Shield Bow lost when they got nerfed. Which is why I take offense to anyone saying that we buffed AD carry again this patch, because again, even though new Stormrazor is strong and was buffed, it was not buffed as much as Kraken and Shield Bow were nerfed. And so any given like old Kraken IE versus new Stormrazor IE is just weaker compared to before. Like best in slot AD carry builds are weaker than best in slot AD carry builds from 13.9. Galeforce is a stronger item, but Galeforce now has an opportunity cost of all these other items, right? When it didn't before. So anyway, either way, we're going to talk about AD carry stuff later on. We're just going to keep on this change list. So the goal was to find about 3% of win rate for Kalista, because, spoiler alert, I'm nerfing Hurricane this patch. We'll talk about that in the AD carry items changes, but what are we going here for? Well, there has been pretty strong direction, given that we should really, really try to bias away from buffing damage and bias away from trying to fix elo skew by just buffing the late game of things. And so this is like, yeah, you know, this, now to be fair, I did this with Azir, but I think it's reasonable for Azir, where this was always his fantasy to be, like, he's always been considered the late game emperor, and he was always a soldier fantasy guy, and so, like, hey, if I can land these changes in a satisfaction positive way, we can fix elo skew by giving him scaling, we can fix some of his aggressive, oppressive pro laning phase stuff and making him not be able to Q spam, and I think we can get there. And I don't think I shipped the perfect version of Azir. I think, you know, I made some mistakes, but I think we're going still in the right direction of the champion, and we're getting there. But anyway, on Kalista, it's like, hey, let's not just keep shifting champions toward late game. Let's not just keep shifting them towards late game damage as the balancing act. It's worth pointing out, by the way, that Kalista has incredibly, incredibly high durability growth. Her armor scaling is 5.2, which is very high. It's in the top 10% of all champions. 5.2 is the top 10% of all champions in armor growth. I believe a Meganar has 6. And that's the literal highest in the game. I could be wrong about that memory, but anyway, Kalista's very, very high in armor growth. Her health growth is 114. That is also among the very highest in the game. And it's like, okay, well, she already has incredibly, incredibly high growth stats, right? 3.75 attack damage growth is like, I think literally the highest of any marksman in the game, and it's not close at all. Her attack speed growth, I think, is like 4%, or it's like 3.5%. It's something very, very high as well. Like, Kalista has a huge amount of scaling stats already. And again, I'm actually nerfing a lot of these growth stats. So I was like, okay, look, let's not keep going down the same train of let's give her even more growth, even more growth, even more growth. But also, I would like if I could buff her in a way that wasn't just damage. So let's go ahead and buff her in terms of durability. So we're kind of re-embracing lane bully Kalista. That, yep, if she's good, she's going to be a lane bully. And now, to be fair, only a few years ago, Kalista was a 100% presence at Worlds with 100% bans and 0 picks. And I remember, actually, I've been telling a random story about Kalista. I was talking to, I'm just going to say it's Sven. I don't think it was him. But it was an established pro, a well-respected pro at Worlds, English-speaking pro, AD carry player. And it was like, hey, you know, I forget the exact context, but it was like, you know, is Kalista really that broken? And my recollection of the conversation was like, oh, I don't know. She's been permabanned for the last 3 months in scrims. And that was the data pros used to continue to ban one red side Kalista. Now, this might not be every single pro team, right? But it was certainly enough of them that this was the case. And again, there maybe have been some teams that scrimmed it and were like, yep, Kalista's still broken. That might be true. To be clear, like, I'm not saying every single pro worked this way, but the one player I talked to hadn't scrimmed against a champion in multiple months. Again, I don't actually remember who this was, right? So don't go out in flames on, because I have no idea if it was actually him. I just made up a name. Either way. So, you know, there is concern that, hey, what if Kalista is back and is the best lane bully and whatever, but either way, I think these are still good changes directionally. So, Kalista has reasonable base health. These health regen and health regen growth changes, I am reasonably happy with. I potentially at some point want to do a longer term project of trying to lower some of the extreme mage dominance in bot lane. So the interesting thing is mages have been incredibly good in bot lane for many, many years. Swain bot lane and Karthus bot lane have been just absurd for at least 2 years each. They've been incredibly strong there for a very, very long time. Seraphine's best role is bot lane. Ziggs has been a good bot laner for like 6 years. Like a really good bot laner for like 6 years. I remember using him back in 2018. I remember, yeah, just like, this has just been true for a long time. I have some theories as to why. I know there are the big AD carry changes like 12.18, or in 2018. 2018 there's the big changes to try to make mages more viable bot lane. Ultimately, they're obviously clearly dominant, but no one wants to play them relatively. Anyway, there's stuff I want to do there. Anyway, part of this is giving AD carry some health regen back. Now, Kalista, of course, already can buy lifesteal. Blade of the Rune King is quite good on her. She used to buy shield bow. This is still, of course, possible for her, especially in the Rune King case. Rune King seems to be maybe her best starting item, but we'll see. But either way, I do want to return some health regen back. And what this does mathematically, actually, is this actually now means that her health regen, and though I've gone, for a bunch of early health, a little bit of early health regen, but a lot of health regen growth, this is actually what I want to do for every champion. I think it's correct, is flatten the time it takes to refill your health bar. I think it is valuable. I think it's fine if champions have different levels of health regen and arguably different levels of mana regen, but I think it would be good overall if the time it takes to refill your health bar or refill your mana bar was relatively consistent across game time. I believe that is useful. I believe it is worth doing. I believe desyncing it doesn't have a lot of value. Now, syncing it doesn't have a ton of value either. You're not going to be like, oh man, I really feel like my health regen, filled me up in exactly 10 minutes both times. Like, that's not a real thing. And AD carries, of course, buy things like Doran's Blade and Blade of the Ruin King and other Vamp Scepter items. So even health regen as a stat is kind of fake on AD carries. But regardless, this basically flattens her health growth against her overall health scaling and lets her fill her health bar at a relatively normal rate. But I think it's a positive thing overall. And so that's why I went for these durability changes on Kalista. Yeah, sure, it is some scaling durability, but again, this is basically just lining it up with her health total overall. And then the final change here, this actually came courtesy of a Reddit comment as I was discussing Kalista changes, and it's lowering the cooldown on Rend. So there was some concern of making Kalista move to Qmax is a bit of a flavor fail on the champion. Now, getting 20% total AD over ranking it, getting decent amount of flat damage over ranking it. There's a flat damage on E1. There's not a AD ratio on E1. There could be if we wanted to give it even more rank up incentive, but it doesn't have to exist. It doesn't really matter that much. Either way, again, just saying it could. Regardless, the point is, softening the cooldown on Rend is, I think, a very good way, along with health regen, by the way, also, and probably some of this, like, your auto attacks that don't Rend do more damage. I think these are all really good tactics for functionally helping Kalista elo skew without being like, oh, we're just going to make her a late game scaler. It's saying, look, if you screw up your Rend reset, it's going to come back 4 seconds sooner. Okay, that's only levels like 1 and 2, but then 3 seconds sooner, then 2 seconds sooner, then 1 second sooner. It's, still something, right? It's, again, if you miss your Rend and, you are only autoing, well, it's actually going to be a little bit better for you. And there's a world where, we go a little bit farther here. Now, I saw some concern online. I'll start with this stuff first, which is, hey, are you trying to make Crit Kalista good? Personally, I don't mind if Crit Kalista is a viable version of the champion. So there's a few thoughts here that are all pretty relevant. So one is Kalista is most unique when she is a Rend bot. Not that she should have no other buttons worth pressing, and to be clear, her W is not a great skill. The champ designer who made Kalista has stated Kalista W is the worst skill he's ever designed. And unfortunate, but true. But also, to be fair, Rend Kalista is actually a really compelling gameplay pattern. I am in no way, and don't believe we should ever, try to remove Rend Kalista as the primary way to play Kalista. It is unique, it stands out, it is really interesting, it's really cool. I think this is great. Overall, yeah, I think that's a pretty positive thing that should make this good. However, we are nowhere near Crit Kalista being optimal Kalista, right? We're nowhere near her actually being a Quickblades character or a IE character or whatever. I think we're really, really, really not close to that. So, okay, that. Um, the other consideration is, well, what would crit Kalista even be? Is she just rend Kalista with lower attack speed? That's just kind of a worse champion. Um, is she Q Kalista? Like, does Pierce crit or scale with crit? Do you get like more rend stacks when you crit on an enemy? You could, but this just means you're playing the same champion just with a different build, and it's like, math problem. Is crit Kalista or attack speed Kalista better at dealing rend damage? Well, do the math and you're done. Now it's taking a little bit of a negative view of it. I think there was a world where making Kalista easier to play by playing a lower attack speed version of Kalista, which is like, yep, I go Quickblades and Hurricane and Bloodthirster and Collector and Essence Reaver, and that's the build. I'm not saying that's actually the right set of items, but that's a champion. And it's like, oh, and I run Conqueror because I'm going to stack enough AD, and it's like, that's probably an easier to play champion at 1.3 attacks per second instead of 2.5 attacks per second when your Rage Blade is fully stacked. Like, in my playtest game at Kalista, I was fully stacked at 2.5 AS on jungle monsters. That was without lethal tempo. Like, it's so easy to overcap. So it's like, okay, and it's like, that's tough, right? That, having to play a champion at, and the thing is, you actually can't play at 2.5 APM because her attacks are so slow. Like, the hop is so slow that you optimize DPS by standing still. Like, that's another one, right? You optimize Kalista DPS after like 1.5 items by standing still and not hopping. Which just like, there's plenty of ear flicks here in the kit, right? This is not to like labor on about how Kalista is poorly designed. Actually, it's a really cool champion. Again, Ren Kalista is a really cool champion overall. But either way, it's saying, hey, look, she's a bit like, we can make her easy to play by making the cooldown more forgiving on Rend. There was a concern raised that if this is a flat 8 seconds, which is my initial pitch, if this was a flat 8 seconds, this would make Kalista not want to rank her E, even though you get flat damage in E1 and flat damage in ratio on E2 and mana restore. You get all 4 of those levers. Cooldown being a 5th was still valuable in ensuring that you don't Qmax instead. From data I have seen, Qmax Kalista within about 1% win rate of Emax Kalista, so do want to preserve Emax as the optimal build. I think it's actually really valuable for her. I think just Qmax Kalista is a much less interesting champion, right? I think it's sort of a fail to make that be the better version. This was kind of like the stuff that I did with Thresh earlier on in the year, where it was like, no, I'm going to try really hard to make Qmax the best version of Thresh, and like, success. Like, I think he's a much better champion. He's in pro. He's more exciting in pro. He's not a lantern bot. He's doing cool plays. Like, I think overall really positive things overall, right? So that, that direction going. Okay. Anyway, yeah. So this is also a buff here as well to Kalista. So we'll see what happens. I do think these set of changes will actually lower her MMR skew a little bit, but in good intuitive ways. I could see Ren cooldown long term going even shorter. Like if this was 10 to 6 or something. There's a real consideration of like, yeah, when Rend is down, you're supposed to be missing a cooldown. Because like if I can just like auto you and rend you for the slow, and then just auto chase you to your turret. And like if Rend's a 2-second cooldown, right? I just like auto rend, chase, rend, chase, rend, because E1 does more damage and refreshing the slow is really valuable. This gets pretty bullshit really fast, right? So like it does need a very meaningful cooldown in order to be a fair skill. So hey, I think 8 seconds is totally reasonable for this ability. But maybe there's actually a reason for this to go shorter long term. Either way, this removes some of the punishment. Again, this removes some of the punishment. And overall, I think better champion. We spent a lot of time into champions. Let's go on to the next bit, which is crit item changes. So I've been looking at data for a while. I was looking at it from day one. I don't believe these are all the changes required, but these are the ones that we basically discussed and approved to go ship into the next patch. I think these are all directionally good to do and correct for the game. Some of these I identified much earlier on. I started working on them either Thursday or Friday. But yeah, let's talk about the changes. Okay, first up, Kraken Slayer is going to physical damage. I wanted the experiment. I'm glad we did it. Players expressed their fears before the changes went live, and then I've seen the game played afterwards. Now, the funny thing is, right, there are plenty of times where player fears are wrong. For example, raise your hand if you saw all the Reddit complaints or hubbub, or I don't want to say complaints necessarily, of all the scaremongering of like, oh my gosh, look at this hybrid pen Rage Blade. Kayle and Teemo are going to be broken. Kayle's best mythic is still Riftmaker. She shouldn't go Rage Blade. Just by the way. Just one example. Just one. Weirdly, Reddit does a lot of this with Kale. Like, Kale keeps showing up as Reddit knows balance, like the meme. It's kind of funny. Either way. Regardless, I'm glad we tried this. So I wanted to see, hey, what if I really, really pushed on-hit champions being hybrid, being much more heavily magic damage? And I look at things like, what does Vayne W deal? What deals true damage? That's not physical damage. What does Kaisa passive deal? It deals magic damage. What does Varus W deal? Deals magic damage. What does Kog'Maw W deal? Deals magic damage, right? There's a lot of on-hit champions out there where their primary on-hit output is actually magic damage. And that is why Kraken Rageblade has hybrid pen on it. It's why a lot of these on-hit specific items deal magic damage on hit. Like Wit's End already dealt magic damage on hit. I switched Recurve Bow into magic damage on hit. I moved Rageblade's damage into magic damage on hit because, hey, this is the type of damage these champions are dealing. Yes, their base AD totally exists, but the stuff they're buying, right, their Hurricanes, their Wit's Ends, their crit chance that gets converted over with their Rageblade, like these are magic damage because their kits are saying I deal magic damage. It's why like there's the AP ratio on Kraken Slayer and AP ratio on things like Shiv to be like, yeah, and the build is you're going to build a Nashor's Tooth, right? There is an already established on-hit item that deals magic damage, that scales aggressively, that, like should make sense on Teemo, Kale, Kog'Maw, like Varus, like they already build this. Now, not Kog'Maw, his ratios aren't good enough, quite enough to be worth doing it, but like that's the direction, right? That's the way they're going. Like, let's embrace that. On-hit marksmen are magic damage marksmen. I think that is valuable. I think that is a good thing. Personally, I believe that. Now, yes, there are outliers like Kalista, where she goes Rageblade and Raw AD, right? She's not doing Nashor's Tooth stuff. She's not going to do that kind of stuff. So, okay, there are some places where it misses, but I would argue there are more hits than misses, and moving in that direction was a good thing for the game. What I did a poor job of properly calling for, and this was like called out, we knew this was a risk, we knew it was a concern. We did it as an experiment, and we're totally willing to change it. And lo and behold, on like day 2 of getting patch data, I'm like, yeah, we should change it. Kraken Slayer is open to more than just on-hit champions. Kraken Slayer is meant to be good on Jinx. It's meant to be good on Tristana. It's meant to be available on default crit champions. And because there's a little bit of magic damage on hit in a lot of other places, like, you know what, right? You can get it through Shiv, you can get it through Stormrazor, you used to be able to get it through Kraken Slayer. We should move it to physical damage. Because, yeah, it's going to be a little more weird for champions like Kale, sure, but you know what? This is the right choice. It should go to physical. And so, we get a physical. And the first version of the changes was, okay, what do the numbers have to be to hold parity with Kraken Slayer as it is on live right now in 13.10? Because champions all gain more armor than they gain magic resist. So the default range champion has 30 magic resist and gains 1.3 MR growth. The average champion in League of Legends gains something around like 4.5 armor growth. So like just taking Annie as an example, and Annie has below average armor, scales up to 99 armor and 52 magic resist, which means you have to deal about 1/3 more physical damage than magic damage to do the same amount of damage to her health bar. So like just baseline, it has to be 33% more at level 18. You have to grow toward that to hit it, and that's not kind of the fact that like, hey, guess what Jax's most common build is? It's Steel Caps and Death's Dance and Frozen Heart. None of those have MR on them. What's Mordekaiser's most common build path? Another like generic top laner. Oh, it's also Steel Caps. It's Jaxxa, which gives both. And then it's like, I forget, but he has like, Zhonya's, right? Oh, Zhonya's the single most purchased item in League of Legends, by the way. Literally number 1. I mean, not counting like, I don't know, long swords or ant tomes or whatever. Zhonya's is the single most common completed item in League of Legends. So not only do champions gain more armor than they gain magic resist, they also buy more armor than they gain magic resist. And so the tough thing there is I then have to ballpark how much more armor are they buying really? Because I can average out base stats and be like, I can land this, right? I can average out armor and MR. I can average out melee versus range champions and all the distributions there. I can even do it based on champion pick rate and get an absolute global average armor and MR by character level. That's not really required. You have to know this against all the items as well, and it gets much more complicated. So I had to come up with numbers. There are a couple of versions of the numbers here, and what I landed on was this is after getting feedback from the other designers that less of Kraken Slayer's damage should be from ratios, and more should be from the base of the item itself. So it's going here. Here are the numbers changes to Kraken Slayer. 20 plus 60% total AD plus 45% ability power becomes 35 to 85 plus 65% total AD plus 60% ability power. So this marks, right, a roughly 1/3 increase in the AP ratio, right? This is like lines it up 1 for 1 basically with that. Of course, the base damage goes up substantially. The AD ratio goes up a little bit. And so, hey, does this end up being around 30% more damage? I forget the exact math. I have it on a spreadsheet somewhere else. It doesn't matter too much. Actually, I can pull it up because it's on a different tab. Let's see. What are the numbers right now for this one? Because I can actually grab it. Yeah, so the tooltip damage is up around 30 to 50%. Actually, wait, is these the old numbers? These are the old numbers. Okay, sorry. I have new numbers. Yeah, okay. The damage is up 20 to 40% on tooltip, assuming you're building a lot of attack damage. And so in the example case of fighting like a generic squishy champion, just like Annie or Ash or whatever, you're getting about the same like total damage to health bar before and after. It's within like 3% for most of the game. But this is not kind of having like an armor stat shard and stuff, so it's actually slightly overstating how valuable this is. I want to point out, by the way, that as we got data in, we also realized that we wanted to buff Kraken Slayer a little bit. It is overall underperforming. Even though we are also nerfing Stormrazor a bit this patch, we still think Kraken Slayer should be buffed to some degree because it is below the line. So there are buffs to Kraken Slayer, there's a buff to Statikk Shiv, there's a nerf to Stormrazor, there's some other stuff, but we're talking about those 3 Noonquiver items first. So it's like, okay, not only do we want to shift it over to physical, and we need to go redo the math to make that okay, we also want to ship somewhere between like 1% and 0.5% win rate onto this item as a first item. And there's some weird stuff going on. So like the winner of this item actually seems to scale pretty sharply with MMR. So if you look at Jinx as an example case, Jinx has like a 1.8% winner disparity between Stormrazor and Kraken Slayer if you measure all ranked games. But it's like a 0.5% winner disparity if you only measure like Plat Plus. And that probably suggests that higher skilled players are better at using Kraken Slayer. They have better auto attack uptime. They are maybe good at warming it up on a minion than hitting you as part of a trading pattern. But either way, there does seem to be some elo skew with Kraken Slayer, which is interesting. I didn't check literally everything. There's limited time in the day to do everything ever. Long term, we can figure this out. But anyway, the suggestion was to have more of it scale with character level. Now, this does 2 things. So one, this buffs the item substantially for on-hit users who normally aren't buying a lot of AD. Like if one of your items is Hurricane does nothing here, but it does care about that. So Hurricane Kraken Slayer as a combo gets better. An item like Phantom Dancer only has 20 AD on it for an entire item slot. It's not a lot. You get a lot more out of this. Kraken Slayer looks to be pretty weak on hit champions. I know there was a bug with Rageblade and Kraken Slayer interactions. Am aware of that. Do intend to fix it. It's a little gnarly. We'll see what happens, but obviously I intend to fix it for this patch. But it can use the buff for the on-hit builds. If you're building a bunch of AD like normal, if you're building an Infinity Edge and all this other stuff, it's relatively flat after accounting for armor. The stickier thing is, well, what if you're actually buying armor? If you're actually buying armor, you're fighting like an example Jax. Well, an example Jax, it's more red than green here. It's more nerfed than it is buffed. So Kraken Slayer would be a strict nerf against like most generic top laners. Unless you buy Lord Dominik's. Of course, in either case you buy Lord Dominik's, suddenly this item is clearly much, much better. So this item should be buffed. It is lightly power positive against other AD carries, but it's like the proc damage of an item is up 5%. The proc only makes up like 1/4 of the item's power budget. So 1/4 of my item is 5% stronger. Is that 1% win rate? Probably not, right? And it's not stronger against tanky targets, which is probably who I'm actually attacking in team fights. But some of this power is once you buy LDR, you're at item 3, you're at item 4, the percent armor pen comes in, and it's definitely better than a magic damage version of this item because you're getting to use the damage amp here. So it's wild. This might end up being a very big overbuff. I don't know how to perfectly compensate for, if you're at least at 3 items. To be fair, you're now in the very back half of the game. The average AD carry doesn't reach 3 items. The average champion doesn't reach 3 items. And even if you get to 3 items, did that make a difference that your Kraken Slayer pop did 19 more damage every 3 autos? Is this 1% win rate? Is it 0.5% win rate? So, right, a lot of moving targets here, but that is the direction going on here. This is meant to be about Kraken Slayer, and the switch to physical damage is meant to, keep conventional crit marksman more as one type of damage. Next up is a nerf to Stormrazor. The goal is to nerf this item about 1% of win rate. It is overperforming. The rule of thumb I got from a different designer who's very good at League of Legends, a good designer, and has worked in the item system quite a lot. Ballparked that 10% gold efficiency on an item is about 1% win rate. So using that as the rule of thumb, losing 175 gold out of 5 AD only gets you part of the way there. So that's to be a second nerf coming in as well, which is going to be energized damage going down by 10. Plus 5% total AD. There's about 15% less damage from Energize. This is trying to make up the rest of the win rate change here from the 5 attack damage gain. This could be too much. It could be too little. But at least it's everything going in one straight direction. Basically, the point here, the AP ratio is not changing. It doesn't really matter. Stormrazor is basically just bad Lichbane. I don't want to further increase this. It's basically not a world where Stormrazor is going to overtake Lichbane, because Lichbane just has good stats on it and a 50% AP ratio and a shorter cooldown. So Lichbane is just better Stormrazor, period. There's basically not really a world to do this unless you're... The reason it's here at all, by the way, was for the Rageblade users of like, well, I actually want to just like get a bunch of attack damage and ability power items. So if I buy a Stormrazor with my Nashor's Tooth, with my Rageblade, it's like, well, I'm getting some scaling out of the Rageblade. I'm getting some scaling out of the Nashor's Tooth. Like, let's just kind of make the item feel better about all these things I'm buying. It was just kind of there. It's not going to abuse much. Like this, isn't, again, a dominant build on pretty much anyone. But we can leave it here because it's not hurting anything. It's fine. It can feel okay. But basically, this item ended up getting a little too poached by it. I mean, first of all, it's just too gold efficient. The baseline gold efficiency of this item is over 100%. I have given this a fair bit of thought over the weekend. My current set of beliefs with item tuning and uniques is that I think items should probably come in between 90 and 100% gold efficient on base stats, and the last like 15 to 20% of power should come from the uniques. And this is like the rule of thumb for how much of your champion budget, how much of your champion's overall output is coming through your items themselves. And what's interesting is, so people don't feel like you're playing the item system when you buy an item like Infinity Edge or Death Cap or I'm trying to think of like stat stick items, like Warmogs maybe even, where it's like, yeah, it just like has stats on it and it does things. And even though you're spending gold on empowering your champion via the item, it just being a ball of stats, like, okay, Shadow Flame is like over purchased. Like, it's just incredibly popular. It's like the third most popular item in League of Legends. And like Sork Shoes and Cooldown Boots are all, these really common items that do a lot of damage, but it doesn't feel like you're playing Shadow Flame. It doesn't feel like you're playing Ludens even, really. It doesn't feel like you're playing Death Hit, you're playing Void Stuff, you're playing IE. But people do feel that way when damage comes out of the item itself. Like, oh no, this feels more like you're playing Rageblade. This feels more like you're playing Stormrazor. And like Prowler's Claw literally has an active dash, like, or used to. Like, yeah, okay, you're clearly playing Prowler's Claw, but it has an active button press that does something. And if you kind of put in your head, like, okay, well, if these items are balanced, and every item, 95% of 100% gold efficiency is locked into stats, and I'm given some budget of 15 to 20% gold efficiency to put into unique, and this means completed legendaries are 115% gold efficient or whatever, or 108% gold efficient or whatever. Might not be the actual tuning, to be clear. Then, oh, cool, I've got a relatively constrained power budget, and each active is going to be about that powerful. And there can be room for divergence, like Statikk Shiv, for example, is 100% gold efficient in attack damage, attack speed, and crit chance. And an item like Zhonya's Hourglass, I'm pretty sure, are paying a lot more for the active. I mean, people are willing to spend $750 for a one-time use of that active. Like, clearly Zhonya's has more of its power budget in the active itself, right? And that's fine. Like, this isn't like every item must work this way, but as a rule of thumb, if an item is balanced, and it has like 95% gold efficiency, 98% gold efficiency, 100% gold efficiency in stats, and then I balance the item, I've picked a moderate to low power unique passive or unique active, which is probably appropriate. Like, I believe that's probably appropriate. I think that is like the right size of an item in League of Legends that should feel pretty good and feel okay. That's my current thinking. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe the ratios are way off. Maybe they shouldn't be 110% gold efficient. Maybe they should be 140% gold efficient, so that items can feel really, really good when completed. There are many ways you could think about this. Again, I'm not saying that I'm right, but that is my view. So I was like, well, we should pull Stormrazor down to 97 or 98 here. Okay, cool. It's down to 97, 98. It was 103. It was clearly over the line. We could have shipped a different version of this, right? I was wrong in my tuning. It was my mistake. I gave this thing 5 AD for 300 gold, which is gold efficiency up. And then I gave it more damage on its unique passive because I removed the slow from it. It's over 2. So it's okay. Let's bring it down to 98. And then if we believe that we want to remove 1% win rate from this item, and 5 AD doesn't remove 1% win rate, we have to nerf the unique passive. And so we either nerf the damage or we nerf the move speed. And my opinion is that this item stands out the most via move speed. In general, certainly you can opt into playing a bit bursty by saying, I'm going to buy Stormrazor, I'm going to buy Shiv, I'm going to buy RFC, I'm going to buy Galeforce. I don't get to land a lot of auto attacks, but I'm going to hit real hard once in a while because they have a freaking Rengar and I cannot survive him. So I'm going to auto attack their, I don't know, Gwen once, chunk her by 20% or something, and then I'm gonna pop Zhonya's when the Rengar ults me. And yeah, that's my build. It sucks really hard, but at least there's AP ratios on those. The Zhonya's doesn't completely suck. And I'm not saying it's like the real build, right? But like to have that as an outlet of like, no, I really cannot repeatedly auto attack. Give me something. I think is a reasonable way to let AD carries itemize to some degree. I think it's reasonable. Anyway, Stormrazor in this shape. Damage still down somewhat, sure, but still, of course, pretty powerful damage. There's still, up to like 190 damage on the Energize, which is like higher than it's been pretty much ever. But the move speed is intact because the move speed is more unique, and if the power budget is in the unique and a bog standard set of gold efficiency on stats, then the rest of it can be in a little bit of damage, which can feel pretty good, can feel okay, not super poachable by assassins, and probably fine overall. But yeah, the more Stormrazor is in like a scaling AD chunk of damage on hit, the more assassin poachy it is. It's actually part of why I made Energize still magic damage, because it's less poachable. It's actually why Galeforce scales off crit chance to be like less Rengar Kha'Zix poachable, right? Knowing full well it was going to be good on Yasuo and Yone, and like that's fine. They lost shield bow. They were allowed an offensive item, right? Anyway, that's the change to Stormrazor. Again, the goal is 1% win rate. If we ever overshoot, these are easy numbers to walk back, right? Next is Statikk Shiv. We think Statikk Shiv also deserves about 1% win rate. This probably doesn't quite hit that mark, but I like almost don't know where to go with this, because it is, I don't want to go any higher on stats. It is 100% gold efficient. I think if Statikk Shiv is a balanced item because its stats are 110%, I think that is just not good. Like I don't want that to be where the item goes. If it needs to gain 1% by gaining 300 gold worth of AD and attack speed, it just means I made a stat stick without a useful passive. But by like constraining myself to like, no, you have like a 4% gold efficiency band to play with, and go make a good enough passive that it's a good item. That to me makes sense and is the appropriate tuning for such an item, especially when it's meant to have a direct comparison with Kraken Slayer and Stormrazor. They literally have almost the same build path, right? Like I believe very strongly in this, and if I am proven wrong via experimentation, then I'll have to update my thinking, right? But it's like, okay, we're gonna buff the magic damage here on Energize by a flat 20. This is pretty meaningful, right? This is obviously a this is a 30% damage increase at level 1. That's only the Energize, but like that's really meaningful. It is obviously a much lesser, closer to 10-ish%, 13% damage increase by level 18, but champions don't reach level 18 almost ever. So this is a pretty substantial Energize damage increase, arguably more than the Kraken Slayer increase potentially, and then a big bump on the mini modifier, 200 to 475. This I believe still essentially won't one-shot caster minions. You still, I believe, have to do some level of work here. It will depend on the point in time. Keep in mind that like minions scale faster than champions do, because minions scale per minute linearly. They scale per minute linearly. Technically, they scale every 90 seconds linearly, and champions gain levels non-linearly, right? It takes more and more XP to gain levels. So like as you go, 7, 8, 9, 10, right? They go bump, 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 bump. Then they start bumping more and more and more, and you're like 10, 11, 12, 13, right? Like, it takes you longer and longer. I don't know what this is. I don't. This is me killing a minion wave. I don't know what to tell you. Don't worry about it. But it's like, okay, well, late swing this really aggressively, and like, this is an effect that like almost triples in damage, right? I mean, it used to, actually triple in damage functionally, and but it's like, yeah, 475. But again, 475 is a number you're not really going to reach. But it's like, yeah, okay, this will get to the, we're getting pretty close to one-shotting cast minions and whatnot. But like, yep, the opponent's item is in fact, fragging minion waves, and that's what we're gonna do here. And yes, it means that AD carries are stuck inside of lanes for less time, especially later on in the game. But like, I don't know. Have you seen Lucian at level 14 before? Like, those waves die fast no matter what he builds. So, there was concern here that, like, if AD carries aren't forced to be on waves, are they gankable? How safe are they allowed to be? How strong is wave clear allowed to be? Worth noting here that I have not nerfed the AP ratio. I'm aware that ARAM Vhagar is pretty frustrating at, like, 5 items when he has a bunch of AP and has Shiv. That is kind of the only outlier, and I was actually tracking this stuff on like day 1, day 2, day 3 of the patch, like over the weekend as well. Like, it wasn't standing out that hard, and usually any player who is smart enough to go out and think of a new build and try a new build, those are players that will tend to have higher win rates because they're thinking about itemization. Like, by not autopiloting your items, you will have a higher win rate, because you're not just following a mobility guide. You're like, no, what actually makes sense here based on their team comp? Oh, I should build this item. That represents itself in win rate. And so any Vhagar player is like, well, I think it's actually a Shiv angle here. Like, some of them could just be wrong, right? Of course, they could just be wrong about it, and they can have like the wrong item or the wrong rune page or whatever, and of course they're going to lose win rate. But they're the kind of player who thinks, and so they're going to more often make smart choices, even if that one choice is wrong. But like on Summoner's Rift, Shiv is not correct on Vhagar until like 4th or 5th slot, and that's like, it's comparable to things like Cosmic Drive, right? And then on ARAM, it's like maybe best in slot last, but again, you have to still account for the bias of like a player smart enough to identify this is a good thing. Like, they have to know Vhagar enough to like realize that he prints AP and buy this item. And again, like, I've looked at like the pick rate data, and like, it's not high for this. So it might be that long term this item really does need to have its AP ratio nerfed on ARAM, on Howling Abyss. That is a conversation I can go have with the modes team at some point. Maybe it's actually going to be micropatch. Maybe we're going to actually do it tomorrow. Maybe that actually needs to happen. I don't know. At time of recording, I don't think it's actually that large of a concern. It's just like, oh yeah, 1 in 100 games, this Vhagar got really fed and bought Shiv, and oh, that was actually kind of strong. But like, I don't know. It's not as impacting as Reddit posted as you believe. Just as a by the way. One other thing I want to point out, actually, you may have seen reports of a Statikk Shiv bug where you can friendly fire with Statikk Shiv. This is a very, very specific interaction. So this does not affect most champions, and it's only if you're against Renata Glask. So there's a bug with Shiv. There's 2 bugs. So one, this has been true for a while with all energized effects. It's been in the game for a long time. It was on live already before the changes, which is if you're playing like Ezreal or Katarina or Yasuo or Yone or any champion that fakes their auto attack, right, with like a Q, or in Katarina's case it's her E. If you have not auto attacked to discharge Energize once, your fake attacks will not deal any damage with Energize. It will consume the charge, but not run the deal damage logic. So there's something in the underlying code of Energize that I need to like go find and fix that interaction. There is a related bug where if Renata ults you, it essentially, you get in this state where your Energize effects are willing to friendly fire if you use a fake attack spell, Ezreal Q, Yasuo Q, Yone Q, Katarina E, without ever auto-attacking for your Statikk Shiv. So like, if you play Statikk Shiv Ezreal, and you literally never auto-attack and discharge, then your Shiv will have friendly fire, and it will give Renata minion kills and give Renata credit for you dealing damage with your Statikk Shiv to your own team. But as soon as any one of these champions auto-attacks a minion, they reset the logic, and the bug is gone. So the bug does exist. It is only a negative to Shiv wielders, and they have complete control over fixing the bug, which is auto-attack once. So it is a meaningful bug. It does need to get fixed, but it is rare because it requires being one of those champions with a Shiv against Renata, and not autoing to like discharge Statikk Shiv to then like fix the team. So I believe those bugs are related somewhere in the underlying scripting of how Energize works. I have to go figure that out. I have to go find that and try to fix that. No guarantees I can fix it in time for 13.11, but I wanted to point out that there was a Statikk Shiv bug with very specific interactions that is fixed through standard gameplay. But hey, by the way, that is there. By the way, FYI, that is a thing going on. Okay, next thing is Ruinance Hurricane nerf. Basically, the shot call made was we could either nerf Hurricane or we can nerf Kog'Maw. Kog'Maw is doing too well. Hurricane is by far his most common second item. It's not close. It's definitely what he's going to run. It's his best option. It's really, really good, right? Hurricane, I definitely launched it overtuned. I probably should have pulled back a bit. I just kind of didn't. I'm just pulling back the on-hit damage to plus 15. Champions like Jinx, there's plenty of non-magic damage marksmen who use Hurricane. So here's what I have noticed with on-hit itemization in modern day League of Legends, which is there is too much attack speed in on-hit itemization. I want to keep Kraken Slayer as a good attack speed item. I want to keep Phantom Dancer as a good attack speed item. It's maybe a little bit weak right now, but that's okay. Right? Zerg still exists, the Tempo still exists, Legend Alacrity still exists, the Stat Shard still exists, but you cannot buy all these things together. I noticed that one of the most performant on-hit items is Blade of the Ruin King. And Blade of the Ruin King has 25 AS on it. And one of the other really performant attack speed items was Old Rageblade. An Old Rageblade without the stacking component. I think it had 30 AS on it. Like, it didn't have that much. And these were completely reasonable, totally acceptable attack speed items. They gave you 30-ish%. And that was enough to make them feel like on-hit items to make your champion attack faster. And if everything had 30 AS on it, you wouldn't overcap nearly as fast. And so I said, okay, well, look, I want to grow Hurricane up to 2,800 gold from 2,600 gold because I want to price it at nearly a full-priced item. Part of why people weren't buying Stormrazor in 13.9 and earlier, despite it being a good item, and it was actually a good item, is it cost 2,700 gold. So it was so cheap that people, I think, just like kind of didn't consider it as good. But that cost saving is really, really valuable. And the thing is, that was part of the power budget. Part of the power budget of the item being that it's cheap does not make for an exciting item. And so it's like, okay, I'm going to grow Hurricane to 2,800 gold. So yeah, it's cheaper than some options. Sure, it's down 200 gold compared to most legendaries. It's down 400 compared to Bloodthirster. Okay, yeah, that's true. That's happening. Okay. But I need to, so I want to lower its attack speed down to 40% from 45. I probably could have gone to 35 or even 30. It builds out of Zeal and a recurve bow. I mean, there's room to go to 30, like no problem at all. But it's like, but what stats can this item have? I don't want to make it recurve bow plus pickaxe plus Zeal. And it's got 5 stats on it, really. Attack speed, crit chance, move speed, attack damage, and on-hit damage. It doesn't need attack damage and on-hit damage. That's kind of wonky. Let's not do that. It doesn't seem, quite right to do. Let's move a different direction. Okay. So let's give it on-hit damage, right? That fits. It used to have on-hit damage before in an old version of the item. It fits the motif of Hurricane, right? You're putting out these extra bolts that deal bonus damage. Yeah, they're going to carry your AD, but it's supposed to be good for on-hit users. Like here, like it actually gives you single target damage. You're not going to lose so much damage by doing this. In fact, it's going to be gold efficient single target damage. The crit chance, the move speed, the on-hit damage. Like this item was like 98% gold efficient. 98% gold efficient without the bolts. But, I talked earlier about Zhonya's and its gold efficiency. The bolts are good, right? The bolts in some cases are, deal 2 to 3x your total damage. Now, it's only if things are actually around, but it's like, yeah, if we want the bolts to be satisfying and feel good, Hurricane should be one of those exceptions where it isn't 100% gold efficient. Rapid Fire Cannon, for example, is another item that you pay 500 gold for the unique passive to make the item like 101% gold efficient. Like, you take a bath on stats there for the effect. And RFC's effect is gain a meaningful amount of attack range. Yeah, like, much like something like Zhonya's, you should probably detune the stats a bit. And that's okay. I think it's reasonable. I really don't want an item that just sits at over 100 if I can help it. And I'd rather have the effects be good. But again, there can be room for caveats, right? But like that's going to be the basic rule of thumb that I'm going to diverge from. And so yeah, Ruinance Hurricane is losing about 10% gold efficiency. He's losing about 300 gold worth of on-hit damage. And that's the way it's going to go. That's what it's going to be. That's what the item is. It's going to be, yeah, you're going to pay for these bolts because these bolts are really, really strong. And that's like the right shape for the item. maybe the better version of Hurricane is actually that the attack speed went down by 10% instead. Maybe it should have lost 300 gold of its attack speed. And I was wrong to have chosen this tactic, and it should have been a 30 AS 30 on hit damage item. Honestly, I picked an easy one, and the reason I picked this was, once again, there is a bit too much magic damage in repeated auto attack AD carry itemization. I don't think it's as big of a problem as people make it out to be. Like, I don't think it's actually that big of a deal. You can, there are plenty of mythics that give hybrid resists. You can just build an armor item, then an MR item, because it's probably going to be mage in their team, right? It's fine. But since I expected this item to be repeatedly approached by regular AD champions like Jinx, Aphelios, and whatnot, who don't deal magic damage on their kits really, you know what? This is the easy thing to tune down. Let's not arbitrarily give a bunch of magic damage. And keep in mind, like, we had items like Wit's End that deal 80 magic damage on hit at level 18, and no one's really offended by Wit's End as far as I can tell. But okay, I don't mind tapping it down. It's fine. This item is still good. I got what I wanted out of it. Like, it's still gold efficient. Its price is still up to a point of usefulness. Compared to the old version, it's minus 5 AS, but plus 15 on hit damage. That's a better item, right? The bolts do more damage than before. They search for minions better than before. Like, this item is still good. I wanted to make Hurricane more appreciable, and it is. So this was the change here. Then we move on to Mythic updates. So Navori Quickblades. This is version 2 of Navori update. The first version was actually 70 attack damage and 10 ability haste. But honestly, I think the right call was switching the Mythic passive back over. So for most of the time in dev on Quickblades, Quickblades' Mythic passive was 5 attack damage. And towards the end, we're making some sort of final calls, final discussions. And it's like, hey, uniqueness is valuable. It would be nice if we had different unique passives for each of the Mythics, if we can help it. And I'm like, well, yeah, gold efficiency-wise, 5 haste is pretty close, 5 attack damage. Sure, why not, whatever. And didn't give it a ton of thought. There was some pushback and like, hey, haste isn't a great stat. Like, AD carries don't really have ability haste. I'm like, yeah, that's true, but like, the types of champions who are getting ability haste actually should feel pretty good about it. You're getting more ults, you're getting more spell casts out. You're not always getting infinite auto attack time. There's still some value here where, like, even though you are kind of prorating your own haste down via the attack reduction, there's still something here. But ultimately, it's like, nah, Quickblades is really, really unpopular right now. It's underperforming. It definitely seems pretty weak. And so 5 haste becoming 5 AD is gold efficiency up. 5 haste becoming 5 AD on item 2 is gold efficiency up, and 5 haste becoming 5 AD on item 3 is gold efficiency up. These aren't huge swings, but they are at least going the right way directionally. If we got to go even harder, we can. That's fine. But hey, taking a relatively light touch, going for like 0.5% of win rate or so on this item or whatever. And then, hey, bringing back the nerf that I shipped in 13.6, which is the Transcendence cooldown reduction being at 15%. I want to point out that this mechanic even only existed at the start of preseason. Like, this change was in like 12.22, where it moved from the on crit reduce your cooldowns by 20% to just on auto attack at 15. That coincided with the spell damage increase as well. So Quickblades has been pog for not all that much time, but is a cool item. I'm happy it is the way it is. I think it's good stuff. And yeah, kind of bring this one back. Honestly, the rest of the ecosystem is down. Oh, and also, as we spent some time talking about AD carries, even though there's more changes, I'm taking a caveat here. I'm taking a detour here. We finally got objective role agency data back. So this is so at the start of the season, like 13.1, AD carry was like 21% of the whole team, and in 13.3, which is just like letting the micro patch changes settle and then just measuring 13.3 by itself, AD carry was like 23% of the entire team. It was still second behind jungle, but in terms of like whose leads translate to victory, it was jungle, and then AD carry, and then mid. It was like really obviously 1, 2, 3. Mid was third. Then top, then support. By 13.9, which was all the changes in 13.6 and 0.7 with nerfing Lethal Tempo, nerfing Bloodthirster, nerfing Quickblades. There's one more nerf, I forget what it was. And nerfing Dragons. AD carries went back down to 21%. Now, the fun thing is, I'm really happy with the changes because, so mathematically, the value of winning bot lane roughly went back to where it was at the start of the year, but the experience of playing AD carry was improved because you get a spike on 2 items, feel a bit better about it. And even though like you're getting less attack speed through the tempo, so you're getting less DPS, you're getting less cooldown refresh through Quickblades, and so you're getting less DPS and fewer spell casts. It felt better to spike on 2 items, even though winning bot lane didn't mean as much because second Dragons wasn't as valuable because the Souls were as good or the Stacks weren't as good. So it didn't mean that you won the game nearly as much as before. But the experience of playing that felt better. So, on whole, like at least if you measure it statistically, bot lane role agency in 13.9 is where it was in 13.1, with all the experiential gains of, hey, I get a spike on 2 items, I feel good about it, AD carry is a more fun role. So I would not be opposed to going further in that direction. Now, I don't know what the bottom, like the bottom is available, like what the low point is allowed to be for like systemic damage, right? Like how much damage comes from non-champion sources? How much do my rune choices matter? How much do my summoner spell choices matter? How much do my item choices matter? How much does earning gold matter? Because if earning gold means nothing, because every unique passive just reads do nothing and every item is 100% gold efficient, well, I can't make good choice in the shop, and honestly, enough of my powers are going to come from leveling up in the first place that it doesn't matter, and a bunch of systems break, right? If it doesn't matter what runes I pick, that sucks. If it doesn't matter what items I buy, that sucks. I don't know where the bar is. I don't know if we're close to the top of what's allowable. I don't know if we're close to the bottom of what's allowable. I don't have strong opinions on this. I know we should be intentional about it. We should have a good answer. I don't know what that answer is. I don't know which direction we should go. But I do know that the sources went down somewhat. The power spike came in sooner. That was obviously power positive, right? Like, of course, you get to buy a stronger item sooner, right? IE is a stronger item than rapid fire cannon. Of course it is, right? And so in 13.1b, when you get to buy an IE second than rapid fire cannon second, you were a stronger champion. Like, that's just objectively true, right? And lo and behold, bot lane was more valuable. It mattered more because now at 2 items, you can win the game, right? You go watch like the MSI finals, like a lot of these fights are like, well, yeah, I got to Galeforce IE Zeal. We're ready to go, baby. We're going to win team fights off of this. And it was like, yeah, if we give our AD carry a bunch of resources, they're going to be on Kraken Slayer IE, Galeforce IE, whatever, in time for all the fights that matter. They're going to have it in time for Baron. Don't worry about it. And if it's like, oh no, we cannot reliably get a Phalos to Infinity Edge in time for Baron, okay, well then who cares? Go give money to Corki and Azir, right? Like this is definitely relevant, right? Like the payoff certainly matters. And the timing of the payoff certainly matters, right? Especially in pro where you're much more responsive to power spikes and playing around your moments of power and your opponent's moments of weakness and whatnot, right? But in terms of measuring overall solo queue, with those overall nerfs, with the lowering of dragon value, for generic solo queue play, we're back to that level where mid lane is, I think it's roughly tied with AD carry right now. Jungle is still overtaking everything. Jungle is still incredible. Keep in mind a bunch of fighter items. So I don't have 1310 data yet. I mean, keep fair, we're still in the middle of 1310. We're not even 7 days into the patch right now. So once we have the entire patch, like, I want to know what happens, right? I want to know which way the lanes go, which way the roles go. Maybe AD carry actually did get buffed and I'm like wrong the entire time. I really don't think that's true. But we'll have to go look. We'll have to go figure out. It also doesn't matter what's statistically true. So I'm going to bring up another example. Even though by the way, there's only one change left in this entire set of notes, and I'm doing this this side tangent instead. It's fine. Don't worry about it. We're just going to keep talking about it. Which is so the idea of a thermocline. It's been used in a couple of different places, but basically the idea of a thermocline is that it's the actually accurate version of a frog jumping out of boiling water, where the frog will actually jump out of boiling water. If you like, right? So the adage is if you put a frog in a pot of water, it's chilling, and you start lighting the water under it, and it's like, will the frog just acclimate to the temperature and let you boil it alive? No. When the water gets warm, it hops out. So that adage sucks. But pretend the adage was true. That's a thermocline, where it's like, oh, you realize too late, and now it's too late. You're frostbitten. You're just going to die in this frozen lake. Is essentially the real world version of that. I believe pro play is like this. I believe that pro play is like, well, we've established that AD carry is the best role in the game. Okay, well, jungle is, but you can't play around jungle anymore than you already do functionally. People already play around the jungle. We know the junglers are important. But it's like, well, we've understood, we've established that bot lane matters more than any other lane. AD carry matters more than mid lane by itself. So we can actually sacrifice support. We can sacrifice top lane. If we sacrifice top lane for AD carry, we win. If we sacrifice support for AD carry, we win. If we sacrifice mid for AD carry, we win. And we're seeing Nautilus mid players, right? And that was true. That was accurate in patch 13.5. And then things changed, and it was pretty much equally valuable to play for AD carry or for mid. But who's going to spend time learning an equally valuable strategy when you're already good at strategy A, right? You can play strategy A at a 9 out of 10, or you can play strategy B that is as good at an 8 out of 10. Why would you ever play strategy B? Like, even if you have perfect information, you're like, actually, we know if we were to play around mid, it would be as good as playing around bot. Why bother learning the strategy when you're trying to catch up to your current level of play? What would be the point of doing that, right? This is assuming that you trust me and that this is an accurate statement, right? So you would have to get enough beyond this to a mid meta for pro teams to identify, oh, if we can get mid focus to an 8 out of 10, we'll beat a 9 out of 10 bot focus team. We'll be strategically better than them, and we will tend to earn wins this way. So this requires you to put in enough practice to do so, and to identify that that is actually true in the first place. And so the question is, how far above? Because if strategy A is like a 7 out of 10, and strategy B is a 7.1 out of 10, are you really going to wait until you can get to that level? Or does it have to be an 8 or a 9? Like in baseline power, right? Before you say, no, we're going to spend our time, doing this work and learning this and learning entirely new champions, because instead of playing, because we're like, hey, we're no longer contesting Jinx Lulu, by the way, right? We're not even we can spend our bans on Aphelios and Jinx if we want, and we can spend a ban on Rakan if we want. But that means that they're going to get to first pick Cassante, and they're going to take Annie mid, and they're going to pick some other AD carries, still going to be pretty good late game, and they'll just play Lulu instead of Rakan. And they just got like an A+ tier of their team comp they already know how to play. And okay, we get the best version of our comp too, right? Like, that's cool. But like, do we know it well enough? Because they for sure know their comp already, right? And okay, maybe for the first week you're like, you don't know that we actually want, Syndra mid. You don't know that we want Syndra. You don't know that we want Jhin. You don't know that we want Leona. You don't know that we want, whatever else. So, we get actually our S tier version too. But then as soon as they know, okay, well, we just ban, right? And you have to do all the trend setting yourself. You have to learn all discovery. Well, okay, well, what are the best mids for mid meta? Is Azir good yet? Is Victor good? Is just Chovy's full AP version of Ahri good? Or you got to learn all these things because no one's doing it for you, right? Like, you can follow JDG's template and just be like, we're going to pick their champions and play their way and use their macro concepts. And we're going to understand that we can sacrifice Sion for the bot lane play to go level 3 dive bot. I'm going to play on the third wave and kill them, or the second wave, I think it is. And dive and 2 for 1, then TP top. We've already learned that strategy. We can do it. I think it was actually BLG who did it. Okay, yep. We understand that, in fact, Abyssal Mask Rush Nautilus is a really good mid laner for surviving every AP matchup and, handshaking waves and reaching late game. And we know the correct items to buy on our AD carry. We know all the good picks. We know all the replacement picks. All this work's been done. BLG and JDG and all these teams showed us how to do it. Welcome to the new season, Energy. You're going to play mid-focused. What's step 1? Because no one's shown it to you yet, right? You need the Thermocline. You need to go so far beyond that either like the reigning MSI champions do it and then everyone copies and goes, please tell us how to do this, JDG. Or you've got to do it yourself. And you're not going to be right the first time. You might be right strategically, but the building blocks, you're not going to have them. Almost certainly, right? And it's going to take you time to get there. And so the Thermocline, right? It has to go so far beyond. And I personally believe, and maybe I am wrong, but I personally believe if you were to wipe the slate clean and get rid of everyone's memories, the optimal way to play League of Legends is actually jungle bid. Now, you probably want to translate jungle bid into bot lane, but like, your resources being a low econ Nautilus is worse than your resources being on a high income like Sylas, or a high income like AP Ahri, or a high income Annie. Yes, I know Annie's already meta, but like, no, your job is killing shit, not supporting a Jinx. And actually turns out that you should play Galeforce Jhin or Galeforce Ashe instead of Aphelios. No, correct. Aphelios is overtuned. Maybe Jinx. Maybe, whatever. Either way. That is my belief. That is my tangent on the Thermocline. There's one more change to go here, which is the other mythic change here. Despite, and I got this internally as well as externally, so I'm just gonna make fun of Reddit here. Man, there were so many Reddit complaints of how Galeforce could not possibly be a viable item. How could Galeforce possibly be good? You have to give up Infinity Edge to buy it. And I did this math months ago. Like months ago, I was like, look, I've done the math here. Like, I know how much damage IE actually deals. Like, I can mathematically just turn crit damage into crit chance in like a sort of scaling ratio. Like, I know the actual gold efficiency of IE at every slot. Like, I know what this item actually does. I'm pretty sure Galeforce is pretty good. Okay, people aren't convinced that Galeforce is good. Okay, I'm gonna lie through my teeth about Galeforce. We're gonna make Galeforce deal physical damage so we can raise the numbers. Just so I can convince you, like, look, this item does 900 damage. No, it never actually does 900 damage. Because they have to be at 1/4 health, and you need to be level 18 with a full build. How many games, no, raise your hands, this patch. How many games have you played with 100% crit chance, level 18 Galeforce? Not many of you, right? 900 theoretical damage in a world that is in 1% of games? My guy? Oh, and it's not 900 damage, by the way, because the damage up is 60%. When they are at 25% health or less. Which means they are at 25% health. Okay. So that means Annie is at 500 HP. Does it matter that this does 900 damage but Annie's at 500 HP? Because Galeforce, like old Galeforce auto, would have killed Annie at 1/4 HP. Like, does it matter that it's 960 physical damage now? It doesn't, right? Because she's clearly already going to die, right? Also, we talked about the difference between armor and MR. You have to deal about 1/3 more damage for the physical damage to be equal to the magic damage in a late game scenario. This is not counting for LDR, which is very relevant in a 5-item scenario, to be very clear about this. But it's like, well, that's part of it. So item 1 is pretty close, right? You're getting level 7, level 8. Armor and MR are relatively close together here. I mean, they're still going to have more armor than MR. Like, it's going to actually still be worse at one item. Okay, it scales a bit harder because of the crit chance conversion, but it's like, I'm just going to throw really large numbers at you so that you'll see it and be like, wow, this number is really, really high. Maybe the item isn't bad. Literally, it's like a lot of the reason why I did this was like, let me just throw large numbers at you to try to convince this item's actually good. Part of the reason I made Galeforce scale with crit chance was I was really, really worried about Rengar and Kha'Zix poaching this when I made it physical damage in order to make the numbers larger. This is also part of trying to not have too much magic damage creep in the game. They said, look, Rage Blade is the magic damage mythic, but Galeforce is still physical damage. You're going to build all this normal stuff. Because I figured you would like be pretty likely to go Galeforce with RFC and Stormrazor and all these energized items. Like, not as a hard synergy, but just like it fit the combat pattern. Like, I would really like you to not have 5 different items that all add magic damage at once, so that half your damage doesn't come out of magic out of nowhere. So let's make the big one physical damage so it doesn't feel quite so egregious. Okay, and then obviously again, numbers have to go up. Sure, that's fine. And so we're here. And it's like, okay, well, Galeforce is overtuned. The Reddit complaints were there. Y'all were wrong. Turns out Galeforce is good. I was right. This item is good. I increased the numbers because, yeah, and actually it's scaling off flat crit chance came in a little bit late when I felt I had to buff these numbers. Anyway, Galeforce has been good. Turns out this item is good. Set in the patch rundown. Anyway, whatever. I told you so. That's all I can say. But regardless, yeah, we're dropping some damage off it. So it's not a huge drop, but like, hey, the maximum damage goes down by 1/16. And even if they're at half HP, it still goes down by 2/3 of 1/16. Because, right, it's going to scale linearly from 0 to 25%. So if they're at half, you're 2/3 of the way to 25% health. So seriously, in almost any meaningful Galeforce situation, this does carry some weight. This, of course, subtracts a little bit as well. This item definitely seems best used by Yasuo and Yone. Of course, they get free crit chance. They are not hurt in any way by this. Like, their crit damage scaling doesn't hurt this in any way. I could add in some logic that multiply this out by crit damage. I don't think that's actually really required. There's all kinds of numbers that can change here. This can scale us aggressively. There's a lot of things that can happen. It's fine. We can do whatever we want with it right now. But so yep, I'm going for intentionally some light touches. Honestly, I believe that Yasuo and Yone are overall healthier characters on Galeforce compared to on Shield Bow. You can damage them back if they rush Galeforce. They have no lifesteal. They have no shield. if they come at you and you land a stun, congratulations. They're at half health now. They're not fighting back. So, yeah, you know, if it has to be nerfed again, of course I can nerf it again. That's fine, right? Can do that. It's not a big problem. But that is the changes as they are now in the patch. There is a good chance at least some of this will change over time. If we want to go higher or lower on some of the changes, if some of the tactics turn out to not be correct, there could be stuff going on here. I'll try for a quick TLDR on this one. Let's talk about it. So 13.11, quick mini preview. This is about Azir and the fact that as Azir gets pro play, he gets more and more popular because of pro play. We go to Worlds, he gets more and more popular because of pro play. Pro play ends, he gets less and less popular. He's in pro play, gets more popular. Gets out of pro play, gets less popular. This is kind of how this works. So Azir has a historically pretty low play rate because he hasn't been in pro for about 3 months. That's basically the reason. But he has room to get buffed. So 2 seconds off Conquering Sands from levels 1 to 7. And then a little bit less than that as time goes on. AP ratio increase on W and summon range on W here as well to give him some better feeling play and a little bit of win rate there on him. Kalista is getting her damage dealt going to 100%, and the basic attack no longer misses the target leaves vision, which are going to be pretty fun, I think, overall to play with. A bunch of compensation changes to make good on that. So the attack damage changes, the total AD ratio on Pierce to make good on the attack damage changing, the base damage and attack damage ratio per stack on extra stacks of Rend, all kind of make good with these changes here to be roughly power neutral. But there are buffs in terms of cooldown going down by 4 seconds early on Rend, and more health regen, and health regen growth as we are aiming for some buffs for Kalista in the patch. This might not be the exact change list as we figure out as time goes on, but this is the direction that we're going, and we're pretty sure we're going to end up shipping this with some numbers changes alongside it. Critical strike items, some things are overtuned, some things are undertuned. First up, Kraken Slayer switching to physical damage. With the damage moving around, it has to go up in damage to make up for the fact that people have more armor than they have magic resist. This could be relatively flat in a lot of context. It is better with LDR, and it's better if you don't have a lot of total AD because there is a flat amount getting added that scales with character level instead. Stormrazor is overperforming, so 5 damage off here, and a fair bit off the energized damage here as well. This might be too strong of a nerf. We might only need the 5 AD change. I'm not 100% sure about this one, but overall, dropping the damage down, Stormrazor seems to be a bit overperformant, and right now has more pick rate than Kraken and Shiv combined. At least as a first item. I forget if it's overall as well. I think it might be true overall, but Stormrazor is definitely the biggest winner of the new quiver changes and is too good, and so gonna nerf that one and buff things like Kraken Slayer and buff things like Statikk Shiv, which is getting 20 more energized damage and a significant increase to the minion mod, which is a pretty solid damage increase here to this overall. So should be a pretty big buff to Statikk Shiv. Should feel a lot better for the wave clear and even a bit more PvP damage to boot. Hurricane is overall overtuned, losing about 10% gold efficiency by losing 15 on hit damage. Navori Quickblades definitely doesn't feel great with how little attack damage it gives. So 5 haste for 5 AD is gold efficiency up. 5 haste for 5 AD on the mythic passive is gold efficiency up. And returning Transcendence back to 15% on the cone reduction, which with the haste going down and overall just kind of making the item feel good, we're going that way with it. Moving into a BF sword in the build path because it can fit it now. I think it's the correct choice for the item overall. Galeforce getting a small nerf because it is overperformant right now as well. Just scaling a bit less aggressively on crit chance. This is largely a Yasuo Yone focused lever here, as they are definitely doing too well on the item. This can keep going down. It's fine. Doesn't need to have really aggressive per item scaling. Right now it does. This could, again, go lower if it needs to, but going for relatively minor touches here on the crit chance execution damage to make it a little bit less powerful. So once again, this is all work in progress. There is no guarantee that these changes exactly are what are going to ship, but since we are doing follow-up for the mid-season, and a lot of these were my projects, I wanted to get some extra context on why what's going on is going on. Thanks for watching. See you next time. Bye-bye.